Hello, I'm Yartami. Welcome to my video. So let's start. Imagine you are the king of a digital empire. You own the software that every artist, designer, and architect uses. You have no real competition. This was Adobe for almost 30 years. But then, a college student with a laptop decided to challenge the king. This is the story of Figma. It is a story about how a simple idea and a new way of thinking almost destroyed a multi-billion-dollar monopoly. Just like the story of Nike, it started with a young man who had a dream that seemed impossible to everyone else. In 2012, a student at Brown University named Dylan Field had a crazy idea. At the time, if you wanted to design a professional website or an app, you had to buy very expensive software from Adobe. You had to install it on a powerful computer. And if you wanted to share your work with a teammate, you had to save a giant file and email it to them. It was slow, it was lonely, and it was expensive. Dylan wondered if there was a better way. He looked at how Google Docs allowed people to write together in a web browser. He asked himself if the same thing could happen with design. This was his version of the crazy idea that Phil Knight had when he wondered if Japanese cameras could do to German cameras what Japanese shoes could do to the American market. Dylan dropped out of college after receiving a Teal Fellowship. This gave him $100,000 to start his business. He teamed up with his friend Evan Wallace. They didn't have a big office or a famous coach like Bill Bowerman to help them at the start. They just had their laptops and a vision. They spent years working in secret. This was a very risky time. They were building a product in a market where Adobe owned nearly everything. It was like trying to sell shoes from the trunk of your car, while Adidas and Puma controlled every store. The technical challenge was massive. Web browsers back then weren't designed to handle complex graphic design. Most people told Dylan his idea wouldn't work. They said the web was too slow for professional tools. But Dylan and Evan kept going. They used a new technology called WebGL. This allowed the browser to use the computer's graphics card. Suddenly, the impossible became possible. They built a design tool that lived entirely on the internet. You didn't need to install anything. You just needed a link. When Figma finally launched, they used a system that felt very familiar to the world of modern e-commerce and digital growth. They made the tool free for individuals. This allowed students and young designers to start using it without spending a penny. It was a bottom-up strategy. Instead of trying to convince the big bosses at giant companies to buy their software, they convinced the designers. As these designers moved into big companies, they brought Figma with them. They shared links with their teammates. Suddenly, 5 people could work on the same design at the same time. This was the sanctuary for designers that Figma created, much like how Blue Ribbon Sports created a sanctuary for runners in their first retail store. Adobe watched this happening, and they weren't worried at first. They had millions of users and billions of dollars. They thought Figma was just a toy for beginners. But Figma's growth began to skyrocket. The mindset of the company was to reinvest every bit of progress back into the platform. They focused on collaboration. In a world where everyone was starting to work remotely, Figma became the standard. It wasn't just a design tool, it was a communication tool. By 2020, the world changed. Everyone was working from home. The need for collaborative tools went through the roof. Figma's valuation jumped from $2 billion to $10 billion in just 1 year. They were no longer the kid with $0. They were a major threat. Adobe realized they had a problem. Their own competing product, Adobe XD, was failing to keep up. It was like Nike's competitors realized that the new brand was taking over the market, and they had to find a way to stop them. Adobe decided that if they couldn't beat Figma, they would buy them. In September 2022, Adobe made an announcement that shocked the financial world. They offered to buy Figma for $20 billion. This was the largest acquisition of a private software company in history. For Dylan Field, this was a massive exit. His share of the company was worth billions. It was the ultimate success story. But then, the government stepped in. Just as Nike faced a $25 million bill from the U.S. Customs Service that threatened their survival, Figma faced a challenge from regulators in the U.S., the U.K., and Europe. The regulators were worried that if Adobe bought Figma, there would be no more competition. They feared that Adobe would just kill the product to protect their monopoly. For 15 months, the deal was stuck in legal limbo. Adobe and Figma fought for the deal, but the pressure was too much. In December 2023, the deal was officially called off. Adobe had to pay Figma a $1 billion breakup fee just for wasting their time. Everyone thought this might be the end for Figma. They had spent over a year preparing to be part of a giant company. But instead of falling apart, Figma did what great entrepreneurs do. They used the crisis as a liberation. They took the $1 billion and went back to work. They realized they didn't need Adobe. They were already winning. Today, Figma is more than just a design tool. They have expanded into FigJam, a tool for brainstorming, and they are moving into coding tools. They have built a network of users that is almost impossible to break, similar to the network of manufacturers and fans Nike built to gain full control of their destiny. The story of Figma shows us that in the world of finance and business, the system is always changing. A small team with a better way of working can challenge a giant that has been around for decades. It takes a specific mindset. You have to be willing to take a leap of faith when the timing isn't perfect. You have to focus on the product and the community. Figma almost killed Adobe by making design social. They turned a solitary task into a team sport. Even though the $20 billion deal failed, Figma ended up stronger. They proved that independence is sometimes more valuable than a big paycheck. Adobe is still a giant, but they no longer own the future of design. That future belongs to the tools that bring people together. So, what is your crazy idea? Because if we learn anything from these stories, it is that the giants are never as safe as they look. Sometimes, all it takes is a browser tab and a link to change an entire industry. You just have to start. Or in the words of another famous brand, you just have to do it.